This mother abandoned her 3 kids for several years and let them live in disgusting conditions all by themselves. On top of all this, she lived somewhere else knowing her kids were in disgusting conditions. She didn't pay her landlord rent for several months, so he conducted a wellness check. Police showed up and found garbage 4 feet high in most of the rooms. They found mold and human feces all over the place, and the tub was overflowing with feces. They did post photos of the scene, however, I can't show them on here, it is that disgusting. And the person that went inside had to wear a literal hazmat suit to be safe. Deputies located a 15-year-old boy and his 12 and 13-year-old sisters. The kids admitted that their mother left them back in 2020. They had been surviving off of food that strangers and their own mother would leave at the doorstep. These were like frozen meals that they would just heat up. They also never had any toilet paper for those years. It's super sad hearing about this. Apparently the kids didn't even know how to flush a toilet or use proper hygiene items like a toothbrush. Their toenails were also so long they could barely walk properly, apparently. They have been transported to a hospital for evaluation. I hope these kids go to an actual good home with a relative or someone nice. The mother, Kelly Bryant, though, was hit with many counts of child abuse, child abandonment, child neglect. Her bond is set at $250 million. She's definitely not getting out of this one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
Creepy last words people said right before dying. Michael said that he used to work as a paramedic, and one night he was trying to keep a man stable after a horrible car crash. He said that the ambulance tore through the street with the sirens screaming, but all that he could focus on was the guy gasping for breath on the stretcher. He was barely holding on after they pulled him from the wreckage. Michael said that he had an oxygen mask on him trying to keep him stable, when suddenly he ripped it off with this wild look in his eyes. "No, listen," he choked. "I saw them when they pulled me out. The horsemen, hooded, watching me." Michael said, "What? Who?" The man's icy fingers dug into his wrist. "They had no eyes," he said. His whole body shivered. "They're following us. I can hear them." Then, just like that, Michael said that he went still and flatlined. Michael said that for a second, all he could hear was the hum of the road beneath them. And then he says that maybe it was his imagination, but he swears that he heard hoofbeats, fast and heavy, keeping pace with the ambulance.
This documentary will haunt me for the rest of my life, but it also happens to be one of my favorites. It's called Paradise Lost, and it details the horrific crime of the murder of 3 8-year-old boys in West Memphis, Arkansas. Like, the crime scene is shown in it, and it's horrifying. It happened in 1993 in a small, deeply religious town. So what did they do? They blamed it on goth teenagers. Reminder, I cover a lot of dark stuff on this page, so viewer discretion is advised, but follow along if you want to hear more. This documentary is called Paradise Lost, and it features these 3 goth teenagers in question, who they called the West Memphis 3. And it's one of the clearest examples we have of a modern-day witch hunt. Like I said, they show the crime scene in this documentary, and it's so depraved that people in the community assumed that the only explanation was that it was the work of the devil.
Christopher never hurt anybody. He had a gentle, loving, and giving heart. And they crucified him in those woods.
The police were under immense pressure to solve the case quickly, so they leaned into the idea of satanic ritualistic killings. So they found themselves asking who could be the local devil worshippers, and it was these kids. These are what they refer to as the West Memphis 3. Damien Eccles became their primary target because he was pretty open about the fact that he liked horror novels, heavy metal music, and he wore black and liked astrology. And by that logic, I'd be a suspect. There's no physical evidence, by the way.
Participated in any type of human sacrifice?
No, I have not.
Jason Baldwin was implicated because he was Damien Eccles' friend, and Jesse Miss Kelly Jr. was like an acquaintance of theirs. The authorities also exploited him. He had a reportedly low IQ, and they put him through a highly suspect 12-hour interrogation without a parent or lawyer present. It also resulted in him giving a fragmented, incoherent confession, which many consider to be a false confession. But the prosecution relied heavily on that confession, and they all went to prison. Jesse Miss Kelly and Jason Baldwin were sentenced to life in prison without parole, and Damien Eccles was sentenced to death. This documentary also sparked outrage, especially to people who have ever felt like outliers of society. 2 additional movies were made after this, following the West Memphis 3 fighting for their freedom and their lives. This documentary exposes how fear, bias, and media can affect public opinion, and how these three were scapegoated and turned into the perfect villain despite no evidence tying them to the crime. I'll leave you with this.
Jesse Miskelly Jr., Jason Baldwin, Damian Eccles, I promise you, as God is my witness, I'll visit all three of your graves.
Guy Pearce. I've now read the comments that you made about me, and while I would have preferred...
So Kevin Spacey's back in the media trying to act like he never did anything wrong. So let me just remind you of a few of the things that he's accused of doing. Back in 2017, an actor named Anthony Rapp testified that at a party in 1986, Kevin Spacey, who at the time was 27 years old, made a move on him when he was just 14. And when those allegations dropped, so many more followed. There were allegations from a Boston anchorwoman named Heather Unruh, who claimed that Kevin Spacey sexually assaulted her own son. Then there was filmmaker Tony Montana, who said that he was left with PTSD for 6 months after Kevin Spacey unexpectedly and without consent grabbed his crotch. There's also actor Robert Cavazos, who came forward and said that he had been touched by Kevin Spacey. And Robert also stated that all the young men that surrounded Spacey knew that at some point they'd probably be harassed by him. Then he was accused of sexual misconduct by 8 different staff members of the show House of Cards he worked on, and at this point the floodgates really opened. Police departments across the world, from the United Kingdom to Los Angeles, California, started looking into past reports about Kevin Spacey. In LA, he was investigated for a sexual assault that allegedly happened in 1992. Then another lawsuit was filed that he assaulted a masseuse at his home in 2016, and I could go on and on and on. But Kevin's had some good luck. A number of the charges against him have been dropped, people have withdrawn their lawsuits, and a number of the people who have come forward to speak about him have died mysterious and sudden deaths. But just because Kevin Spacey has never been actually convicted of one of these crimes, that doesn't mean that he's not guilty of them. This whole thing essentially has boiled down to his word versus theirs. And I'm the type of person that always believes victims, especially when you work like me in exposing pedophile rings and these pedophile predators. You always start out believing the victims and then work backwards. And if there wasn't any truth to any of these allegations, why would they have been brought up in the very first place? I mean, there's also the fact that you have to bring up here that Kevin Spacey was known to be friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He's tried to go on shows and deny it, but he's on the flight logs. So yeah, it's horrible because Kevin Spacey is indeed a great actor and he's been in some of my favorite films. But it absolutely sickens me to see people defending him when there is so much evidence of the things that have happened. And we just can't let people like this fool us into thinking that they're completely innocent. I just can't believe that those are some of the comments that I've been reading about Kevin Spacey when it's very, very clear that this guy is a pretty bad dude. And that's saying it very, very lightly.
Kyle Plush had reached into the back of his Honda Odyssey for his tennis gear when the third row seat flipped over, pinning him against the floor. He was trapped, his chest compressed, unable to escape. But Kyle had his phone. He managed to call 911, and in his first call, he desperately pleaded, "I'm stuck inside my van in my school parking lot. I'm going to die here." 5 minutes later, Kyle called again, gasping for air, saying, "I'm almost dead." A dispatcher then sent officers to the school parking lot where Kyle's car was parked, but they never got out of their vehicle and checked each car individually. They just drove past the area and left, most likely thinking it was just a prank. Sadly, 6 hours later, Kyle's father found him dead, still crushed underneath the seat. The cause of death? Positional asphyxia. He was slowly suffocated by the weight of the seat. His death sparked outrage and reform, exposing major failures in the 911 system. His cries for help were real, but no one listened in time. Kyle's death was slow and excruciating. This poor teenager slowly suffocated upside down in his own car.
Creepy last words people said right before dying. Rachel said that she had been caring for a female patient who was dying of stage 4 lung cancer for weeks. She was frail, her voice barely more than a whisper, but sharp as ever. One night, during her rounds, Rachel said that the patient stopped her with the question, "Did you see him?" she asked. "See who?" asked Rachel. "The man in the suit. He comes when the lights are low, stands by the window. He's handsome, but his eyes." She shuddered. "He keeps asking me if I want to make a deal," she said. "He says he can take it all away. The pain, the sickness. I tell him no every night. Every night I tell him no," she said. Rachel said that she thought it was the morphine talking, until her last night. She gripped Rachel's hand and whispered, "He's angry tonight. I told him no again." Her breathing grew heavier. "He said it was my last chance." Rachel squeezed the patient's hand and told her to rest, but as she turned to leave, a chill ran down her spine. The room felt different, heavy even. An hour later, the patient had passed away. Rachel said that she whispered a quiet goodbye and glanced out the window. For a split second, she said that she swears she saw something, a figure in a black suit, watching, and then just as quickly, he was gone.
This is the craziest, most bizarre murder caught on camera, yet the killer is still out there walking free. It was January 2019 in Tomball in Texas. A woman was setting up a garage sale on her driveway. That woman was 29-year-old Liz Barraza. Liz was born in Illinois and grew up with her parents and her brother Robert. Liz was a huge fan of the Chicago Cubs baseball team as well as the Harry Potter books and films. She was a super kind and creative person and was really interested in psychology. She didn't have any enemies that we know of. Liz graduated from Klein Collins High School in 2008 and met her husband Sergio while at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas. The pair were a really happy and friendly couple by all accounts, and while they didn't have any children, they had a puppy who they kind of treated like their child. They also had really similar shared interests. They were both involved in kind of clubs where they frequently dressed up in costumes and went to like conventions by the sounds of things. Now the couple were due to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary and had a trip planned to Orlando, Florida to go to the Universal Studios and Disney on the 27th of January. But Liz would never make it there. On the 24th of January, the night before the horrific murder, Liz decided to, kind of as a spur of the moment thing, have a garage sale. She figured that this would help the couple raise some funds for some holiday spending money. You know, Disney can be really expensive. Now, other than putting up a few signs together in the local area, the pair really didn't advertise this garage sale anywhere. It wasn't on social media, so nobody else could have known. The following morning at 6:08 a.m., Liz popped over to Starbucks on her own to grab herself a coffee and then got back at 6:16 a.m. Now we know this because of CCTV. She then began to get some things together to sell on her garage sale. Sergio at this point did help a little bit, helped her kind of lift the heavy stuff, and then he headed off to work at 6:48 a.m. Immediately after, pretty much at 6:51 a.m., so only literally a couple of minutes, a dark-coloured Nissan truck drove towards Liz's house. A minute later, it parked behind Liz's car and the person in the vehicle got out. This is captured on CCTV, but frustratingly it was dark and the car's headlights kind of prevented us from seeing the actual number plate on the vehicle. Now the murderer appeared to be wearing what looked like a dressing gown. It was quite flowy and either had long hair or had a costume or wig on of some sort. Now the person walked up to Liz and kind of was walking with purpose but not running, and seemed to kind of have some kind of interaction with her, either show her something or tell her something. Then the killer pulled out a revolver and fired 4 times at poor unsuspecting Liz. The fatal shot was to her face. The murderer then really quickly sprinted back to the vehicle, and multiple neighbours, having heard the commotion, started ringing 911. Now bizarrely and potentially by mistake, maybe on purpose, the murderer actually then drove back by the scene immediately after before driving away. Nothing was found at the crime scene like something that had been showed or given to Liz, and nothing had been stolen either, so it was really difficult to ascertain a motive. There were numerous CCTV clips filmed of the incident from various neighbours, kind of like Ring doorbells and things like that, but unfortunately a lot of these just weren't very good quality, were quite far away, or just captured audio. Police were really unable to get a good idea of what the perpetrator actually looked like, or even if it was male or female. Liz's parents were the first family members to arrive at the scene, and then her husband Sergio, and they were all absolutely devastated. Obviously, the first person that the police looked at was Sergio, the husband. I mean, it's usually the kind of first port of call. However, Sergio was really cooperative with police. He did do a lie detector, and he didn't really seem to have any motive for wanting his wife dead. They sounded like they were really happy. Nobody really had any inside information about anything going on wrong behind the scenes. Phones were looked at, there was no evidence of any affairs on either side, and also they had money. They weren't in any kind of financial difficulties. Now, Liz did actually have a life insurance policy, but as far as I can tell, Sergio did not claim this because he didn't want to look guilty. This all happened in 2019, and the case still remains unsolved. Sergio is now remarried, but he says he still loves Liz and he hopes that they find who did this. Liz's parents believe that this was a paid hit from somebody, but the reason remains unclear. Let me know in the comments if you have any theories or any ideas of what potentially could have gone on here. Someone must know something.
I was 25. I went on a solo trip to Rio de Janeiro. My favorite DJ would be there that weekend, and I always wanted to go anyway. I've traveled solo many times in my life and never had any issues. Airbnbs aren't expensive a little outside of the city, and the one I was staying at was very nice and comfortable. It was its own little one-floor house, but the whole inside was very modern and clean. The Friday that I landed, I unpacked at the Airbnb, grabbed dinner, and went to the rooftop venue where the DJ would be performing. The first day and night all went well, and I met some really cool people at the rooftop. James, Ethan, and Jess. Ethan and Jess were dating. James, I guess, was third wheeling on the trip. The next day, I met up with them as they were also on a trip here. We got brunch together, then we checked out some of the sights together, like the Christ Redeemer and Sugarloaf Mountain, and then we hit the beaches. Unfortunately, they had tickets that they had already bought to another show that night, which I couldn't go to, so I was back to my solo ventures, which was fine. I still found things to do. Eventually, when I was hungry, I walked back in the direction of the Airbnb towards the outside of the city. On the way back, I stopped at a restaurant I found. I can speak a little Portuguese, but I'm by no means fluent. So I tried to keep to places where people seemed to speak English while I was alone. The menu on the window had some English writing, so I went inside. This restaurant was kind of small and dark. A lot of the restaurants in the area were expensive, but this one seemed affordable, so I stayed. The dining space was very long and narrow. It wasn't really busy. There were a few people sat further down at a couple tables. Then there was a man seated at a table basically next to mine. He was about 50. I wondered if he was another tourist. He and I were the only two people seated alone in here. The server came over and initially spoke in Portuguese, and I asked in Portuguese if he speaks English, and he said yes. From there on, I ordered in English. I noticed the man at the other table, looking over, watching as I ordered. It was kind of weird. When the server walked away after taking my order, the man said in English with a Portuguese accent that my Portuguese sounded good. I said thank you, and he started talking to me in Portuguese, as if giving me a lesson. I think he thought he was coming off as charming, but it was annoying and creepy. I kept looking down at my phone to act distracted, but he'd keep talking to me, both in English and in Portuguese. I'd humor him to be nice and not create awkwardness, and I tried my best to converse with him in Portuguese, as he'd correct my mistakes while trying to speak. The conversation was basically where I'm from, why I'm here, what I did today, and where I'm staying. I kinda just made up that I'm staying with a friend. What really creeped me out was when he told me how sexy I am when I talk in Portuguese. I was hoping he was leaving soon, but a part of me died inside when I saw the waiter bring him his food. Luckily, my food didn't take long. I got some pork stew dish. The man asked how it was. I told him fine. He stopped talking as much now that he was eating, thank God. I ate quickly. When I was done, I hurriedly asked for the check just because I didn't want to converse with this man anymore. The man also asked for the check right after I did, which I found so annoying and strange. He wasn't even done eating. Once I paid, I got up and walked out. The man said something in Portuguese, but all I said was bye and kept walking. It was dark out now, and the streets were a little less lively. I was walking for a while when I came to an intersection. While waiting to cross, I noticed the man from the restaurant across the street. He was definitely looking at me, but looked away the opposite direction when I noticed him. Maybe he had to walk the same way. It wasn't that unlikely. I continued to walk back, and as I was getting closer, I kept turning back just to see if he was still in sight. He wasn't. I arrived to the Airbnb. I got to the front door and looked around one more time, and I noticed way down the block, That man standing on the corner by the intersection. He was staring in this direction. I felt my heart drop. He was following me. I let myself inside the house and locked the door. Then I closed all the blinds. Now he knew where I was staying. I panicked and called my dad and told him. He told me to just be alert and make sure everything is locked, and to maybe keep a knife by me. It was a Saturday night, and my flight wasn't until late the next day, so I did want to go out. Eventually, I called an Uber to a bar in the downtown area, and I went to a venue having a house music night. I was there for maybe a couple hours before calling an Uber back to the Airbnb. When I got back, I let myself into the house kind of drunk. I sat down on the couch just to relax for a bit, but I noticed something. I heard the sound of the outside, and then I saw the blinds to one of the windows blowing from the breeze. The window in the kitchen was open. I had all the windows shut because the air conditioning was running. I immediately knew to get up and leave the house quickly. I called the emergency number and did my best to articulate to the operator in Portuguese that there was a home break-in. The police showed up in a matter of minutes, and I came out from behind the bush I was hiding in across the street when they did. One of the police officers did speak a little bit of English, so I was able to tell him that the window was opened and I was being followed earlier. The police entered the house and yelled things I didn't understand. The moment I saw them walking outside with a man from the restaurant in handcuffs was the most shocking moment of my life. The mix of emotions I felt, disbelief yet relief, but also horrified. If I hadn't called the cops, if I had gone into the bedroom where he was probably hiding, I didn't even want to think about it. He was taken away, and I never had to see his ugly, creepy face again. I'm glad he was stupid enough to not close the window behind him. I should have listened to my dad and locked all the windows as well. I just never imagined he would actually climb through one though. I left the next day, and haven't returned to Brazil since.